Good afternoon, friends. Okay. There was one small topic, gentrification. इसको भी बता देता हूँ. It is related with the topic of morphology. So what is essentially gentrification? It is, in simple words, it is improvement in the morphology of inner city, particularly zone 2, inner city. So it is essentially here, it is related with the rehabilitation of slum zones. Out of zone 2 to other areas, mainly outskirts. So this is what we simply mean by gentrification. Now there are two views with respect to gentrification. One is the positive view and other is the negative view. This topic is important and can be asked any time because there were a number of articles in sociological and geographical journals regarding gentrification. In recent times, it was seen in India that the only work that has been done in the smart city project is displacement of the slums. Okay? And in this context, this is taking place very increasingly in many of the metropolitan cities of India. And that is why this issue was in news. Okay? It has been in news for past 2 years. So again, it is an important topic which can be asked anytime. So gentrification has two connotations. One is the positive, and positive view is held by the city planners and capitalists. So what is this positive view? They see that in present era, what is happening? In the present era, all cities want to become world cities. They want to become the part of global hierarchy. They have objective of increasing employment. So many objectives are there, several objectives are there. One of them is increasing employment, improving infrastructure, etc. Several things. For each of these, what is required? It is required that there should be presence of investment. So how they are going to get this investment? They would be able to attract investment through from private sector. आज के टाइम में मेन इन्वेस्टमेंट क्या हो रहा है? Is it private? It is private sector investment. So they want to attract investment, including the foreign investment. They want to attract jobs, which are the type of economic activities which are most remunerative today. Can I say many services? Queenery services, what we call them as. So they want to attract what? More and more queenery services. Now people who are involved in these queenery services, can I say they have special profile? They have special profile. Okay, special profile means you see some of the like software engineers and those who are particularly working in big companies, they will have a different type of attitude. पता नहीं अपने आप को क्या समझते हैं? Type of attitude. So they would be like कि ये क्या कचरा पड़ा हुआ है? Okay. This type of attitude. So everything they want very up to date, very modern, very beautiful. Because that is the profile of the people who are involved with these services. They would want fantasy land type of areas, Disneyland jana hai, and different type of needs they have. So again, to attract such type of investment, to attract such type of services, what is required? Beautification of the city is required. Improvement of infrastructure in the city is required. ठीक है? देखा होगा अक्सर, you might have seen, many times I have seen that people traveling in metro and कोई बेचारा कोई गरीब सा आदमी आके खड़ा हो गया तो it would be like क्या ये कैसे बैठा? They would be like this. ठीक है? So again, we are talking about similar type of people because that is a particular profile. So what is very much important? To do this, what is required? We require beautification of the city. Beautification of the city is essentially required. Slums present in the central part are like a blot in the heart of the city. So again, what is the case? They don't want these slums to be present in this heart of the city. Also, what has happened? The zone 1 has become overcrowded. So the activities need what? They need to expand. They need better infrastructure to expand. So this, according to city planners, this is essentially what? It is an attempt to upgrade the infrastructure and beautify the inner city areas. Okay? So it is done from what? Positive mindset. Also it would have positive impact on the slum dwellers because they are getting better housing, because they are being rehabilitated to already build better houses where services and other infrastructures are present. So this is one view. But दूसरा view भी है, which sees this phenomena as negative, and this is mainly the Marxist scholars. So Marxist scholars are critical about this gentrification. They believe that this should be seen as encroachment of rich in the area of poor. Encroachment of rich people in the area of poor. ठीक है? So they ask many questions. That if it is just beautification of it is related with the beautification of the city, or it is related with, if it is related with demand for new functional areas, then why in most cases slums are replaced by high rise expensive apartments. So what is the kind of excuse which is given? That zone 1 has become overcrowded, it needs more land, the economic functions require more space to expand. But when this gentrification is being done, what is actually happening? Some builders are taking this land, and what they are doing? They are building apartments which are residential in nature. So Marxists argue that it seems that the rich people are fed up with living so much far away from the center of the city. Because now cities have become what? They have become too big. And the real travel time, even if you're, suppose I can go and buy a flat or even a farmhouse in Noida, Greater Noida. ठीक है? 40-50 लाख का मिल जाता है. अच्छा फार्म हाउस. बट वहां से डेली ट्रेवल करके यहां पर आना, इट इज लाइक व्हाट? इट इज लाइक अ टॉर्चर. Every day you're at least 3 hours, minimum of 3 hours will be going. Okay, so it is a very, very problematic issue. So Marxists argue that it seems that the rich people are fed up of living so much far away from the city because cities have become too big and the travel time that they have to endure every day. Thus now what they want to live near the center of the city, in the central part of the city. And that is why what they are doing, they are encroaching in this area which was area of slums, very poor people, most poorest people of the city. Okay? So they argue that it seems that rich are fed up living so far on the outskirts of the city. On the outskirts of the city, and now want to live in the heart of the city. Okay, so this is one question they are asking and they are critical of. Second thing they are critical of is that why displace slum dwellers to the outskirts. Why you want to displace them to the outskirts of the city? There they don't have any employment. Their employment is where? Near the center of the city. If they don't have employment, what they would do? How they will earn their living? They cannot afford commutation cost, which is high from the outskirts to the center. So, like for example, if you look into the case of Delhi, दिल्ली में जो मेजॉरिटी ऑफ अभी स्लम ड्वेलर्स के लिए जो हाउसेस बनाए गए हैं वो कहाँ पर है? दिस प्लेस, दिस बवाना, दिस रीजन. ठीक है, और ये बवाना है. कैन यू सी हम कहाँ की बात कर रहे हैं? दिस इज रिठाला. यहाँ से अगर मैं रिठाला जाता हूँ अपनी कार से, मेट्रो से भी जाता हूँ तो कम से कम 1 घंटा लगता है. ठीक है. So we are talking here about Rithala यहाँ पर है, Bhawana कहाँ पर है? This is the area where majority of the houses have been built. And the slum dwellers जो यहाँ से निकाले जा रहे हैं, different parts of the inner city, they are being rehabilitated there. What will happen? It is obvious they will take possession, but they will come back and make another slum. It is but obvious. So you are trying to do something which is going to be unsuccessful, because they don't have any living source there. How they will earn their living? Question arises that if you want to really rehabilitate, if you want to really beautify, why not you use here the vertical growth model and accommodate them in the EWS quarters. Vertical growth model and accommodate them in the EWS, economically weaker section quarter. This can be done easily. It is not a big issue. But what is happening? This is not being purposely done. Because they don't want this population, which is, for them, this population is what? Jahil Gamar, very violent. They don't want to be even near to this population. Okay? Again, this is the main issue, and this issue goes on. Unfortunately, we find that government is not changing its tactics. It is not only in India, it is throughout the world, this phenomenon of gentrification, particularly in the developing world. Okay? So this is the gentrification that we find. Moving on, next topic is functional classification of the towns. Functional classification of the towns. You know what is functional classification? Classification, we have seen, it is ordering, achieving some kind of order in what is reality. So classification is what? It is a tool of study. It is a tool of science to bring order in the given set of information. That is what we simply call it as classification. So what we can do, we can classify cities according to functions they perform. Like for example, हमने एक already classification किया था, lost का model याद है? We classified the central places into two types, specialized and non-specialized. ठीक है? So that was what? It was a type of functional classification we were doing. So that is what we mean by functional classification. For example, I can call some city as university town like Roorkee. It is what? University town. Like for example, Visakhapatnam, it is what? A port town. Manufacturing town. Jamshedpur is essentially what? It is manufacturing town. Okay? If I talk about Manali, it is what? Tourism town, resort and tourism town. Okay? So different type of classifications we can do. We can identify the functions and we can classify the towns accordingly. Or I can call some town as monofunctional town, specialized town, dual functional town, or even diversified town. Like Delhi would be classified as what? Can I say diversified town? Delhi is performing so many functions. So this is what we mean by the functional classification. Now, एक क्वेश्चन लिखो. Assess the need for functional classification of towns. 150 words. assess the need for functional classification of towns. I'll give you 2 minutes. Practice it like it is a test. Okay. So it is saying assess the need for functional classification of the town. I can write one introduction if I want. I can say that functional classification of the town is an important activity of urban geography. Is an important activity of urban geography. Which serves two major purposes. Two major purposes. So first purpose is practical purpose. Second purpose would be what? Academic purpose. Academic purpose and practical purpose. किसी ने भी सोचा? Okay, good. One person. We have to think about both. Whenever such type of purpose-based questions are asked about a theme, again it would serve two type of purpose. जैसे हमने QR में देखा. One of the purpose of QR was what? Saving the status of geography as a discipline. ठीक है? So here also we'll be talking about two type of purposes. अब practical purposes में क्या क्या बोल सकते हैं? Okay. Okay. Can I say, I can start my answer with, according to Chris Toller, centrality of a city or central place is function of central goods and services, central goods and services provided by it as well as their range. As well as their range. So, study of thus, in other words, study of functional characteristics of the city gives an idea about its centrality and location in urban hierarchy. Location in the urban hierarchy. This determines the future flow patterns. The future flow patterns, comma, including that of resources and migration. Calculating and planning for such patterns is key to making cities smart and sustainable. Making cities smart and sustainable. ठीक है, अब देखो मैंने इसमें क्या क्या किया. बहुत सारे इंपॉर्टेंट कीवर्ड्स यूज किए, थ्योरी भी यूज की, ठीक है, और लिंक भी कर दिया. सो दैट इज वन प्रैक्टिकल यूटिलिटी. ठीक है. दूसरा, can I say such a functional classification is useful. Such a functional classification is useful. Useful for what? Useful in regional planning as well. As well. Here also I can name some person. According to R.P. Misra, the network of growth foci are chosen on the basis of existing central places. Thus, the nature of functionality helps in determining what? The choice of growth foci to be chosen. the choice of growth foci. So you tell me, for example, if a city is doing, it is only collection center of grains. Can I say, at best, we'll classify it as service center. But if there is also presence of manufacturing at a place, can I say it has potential to become a growth center? If there is also service industries which have grown, can I say it has potential to become a growth pole? So what is determining the position? Which growth foci will be choosing? What is determining that? It is the functionality which is determining. Okay? So again, that means understanding of the functionality of the cities becomes crucial in urban planning, development planning. Urban as well as development planning. So, एक point हो गया हमारा. Then we can talk about from academic angle. Academic angle. Can I say classification is essentially a tool of science through which we bring order in the observed reality. Observed reality. Thus, you tell me, can I say functional classification, will it provide a scientific outlook to urban geography? It would essentially give us scientific outlook to urban geography. Outlook to urban geography. Okay? So that is basically what we'll be talking about when we'll talk about the utility of functional classification. Why there is need of functional classification. ठीक है? तो ये दोनों पॉइंट याद रखना है. ऑल्सो अगेन बार बार मैं इस बात को बोलता हूँ, 500 में कितनी बार बोलता हूँ कि गाइडेंस इज वेरी मच फेमस फॉर कंटेंट. ठीक है? एंड कौन है यार, इतना क्यों फोन कर रहा है? एक मिनट. So guidance is very much famous for content. One of the most underemphasized part, content तो no doubt superb है, but one of the most underemphasized part is the way we handle the questions. Now this is one of the techniques you have learned today. In many places you just have to diversify the number of points. So always we have, whenever we undertake, in academics when we undertake activities, याद है positivism में भी देखा था हमने principles. So one was the utility principle. किसी भी study का, if there is no utility, it is not worth studying. And one would be definitely the academic angle. Also you saw how I was able to link number of concepts together, weave them together, and make a meaningful item out of it. ठीक है? अगेन ये कैसे आया? क्या मैंने इसको कहीं पढ़ा था? अलग से किसी किताब में लिखा हुआ है कि यूटिलिटी ऑफ फंक्शनल क्लासिफिकेशन? किसी भी किताब में नहीं लिखा होता है. टीचर्स डोंट टॉक अबाउट सो मच जनरल थिंग्स. How I was able to do? I was able to do because I remember the basics very well. The basics are on my tongue. सोते वक्त भी मुझे उठाओगे तो मैं समझा दूंगा. आई एम सो मच वेल वर्स्ड इन द बेसिक्स. एंड उसी से सारे इंटरलिंकेजेस आते हैं, उसी से सारे चीज़ें आई एम एबल टू प्रोड्यूस. दैट मीन्स, बार बार मैं इस बात को रिपीट करता हूँ, वन ऑफ द वर्स्ट मिस्टेक स्टूडेंट डज इज वी थिंक क्वांटिटी इज इक्वल टू क्वालिटी. बोथ आर फंडामेंटली डिफरेंट थिंग्स. इफ आई प्रोड्यूस टू मच ऑफ क्वांटिटी, अभी देखो क्या हुआ है, पास्ट 1 year आई हैव बीन producing too much of quantity in my teaching. What has as a result happened? Somewhat quality has gone down. Because I was so much tired. Same thing here also. Don't think that by reading so many books, your understanding and the quality would improve. Quality will improve by reading the same thing again and again and living those things, practicing those things, thinking about them, using them in your practical life. ठीक है. सबसे अच्छी बात ज्योग्राफी की यही है, इट इज अ सब्जेक्ट विच वी सी एवरी डे इन अवर सराउंडिंग लाइफ. एवरी डे, एवरी एस्पेक्ट, चाहे वो एग्रीकल्चर हो, चाहे वो इंडस्ट्री हो, urbanization, population, everything we are seeing every day in our life. ठीक है. So we actually live geography every day. ठीक है. So that is what you have to keep on understanding, because I also as a student had tendency to look for many of the things already given, but वो छोटी छोटी चीज़ों से जो हमने ऑलरेडी पढ़ चुके हैं प्रोड्यूस हो सकता है. इस आंसर में मैंने कोई भी एक भी ऐसी बात नहीं बताई जो तुम्हें पता नहीं थी. यू न्यू ऑल द थिंग्स, हमने वो सब कुछ डिस्कस कर रखा है. जस्ट द थिंग इज यू हैव टू वीव देम टुगेदर. ठीक है. ओके. सो दैट इज व्हाट वी मीन बाय फंक्शनल क्लासिफिकेशन. सो दैट इज हियर द फंक्शनल क्लासिफिकेशन. सो इसमें लिखा हुआ है, फंक्शनैलिटी रेफर्स टू set of economic activities, services and goods provided by the city. It largely depends upon the demand and supply mechanism. Demand and supply mechanism. Demand का मतलब यहाँ पर क्या हुआ है? Is there enough threshold population? That is demand. Supply, is the city in a position to supply those demands? ठीक है. So it is function of what? Demand and supply. Even if suppose there is demand and the country doesn't have the technology, for example, will it be able to provide that? It won't be able to provide. There is so much demand in India. Like for example, demand for, you take the case of solar panels. In future we find that there will be very high demand for the electricity as soon as we shift towards electric mobility. Again, right now we don't have the technology to produce solar panels. We are mainly doing what? We are assembling the solar panels by importing the panels from China. So again, demand can be there, but maybe the case we are unable to supply. So what function is provided by the city similarly is dependent upon two factors, demand and supply. ठीक है. The functional classification aims at grouping of urban centers with similar functions. So it is basically what? Grouping of urban centers with similar functional characteristics. Such characteristics may be identified on the analysis of data or on employment or occupation characteristics. So there are many ways we can do. One way is simply I take the census, and on the basis of census I identify, I use the census data, so I can look into what is the share of the functions in the GDP. That is one way. Or share in the total employment which is provided. Or I can look into share in the occupation, means if you talk about the share in the total number of people employed. How many people are employed in which sector? One is monetary point of view, I can take up. Other is I can take up from the numbers point of view. Okay? That is one way. Or I can do another thing. I can go on field survey and I can look into whether there is presence of shops which can be more retail, wholesale, or there is presence of factories. Okay? So I can do it on the basis of survey also. So there are many ways in which this functional classification can be achieved. Now there are two main ways in which this functionality is approached. One is the dominant function approach, and the second one is the multifunctional approach or multiple function approach. So there are two ways in which it is derived. Multiple function approach. So if we look into these two type of approaches, dominant function approach. So dominant function approach, first of all, is based upon a kind of assumption. Assumption that one function is more important than the other. Important than other, which we can quantify. This significance we can quantify. Quantified. In other words, it is more similar to what? It has similarity with the idea that there is more monofunctionality. There is greater monofunctionality. So it is similar to idea that there is greater monofunctionality to be found. Greater monofunctionality is to be found. Okay? So that is one very, very important thing. Now, thus here what we do, we rank the functions. We first do what? We calculate calculate each function share in employment or occupation. Employment or occupation. Okay? We are calculating them. And on the basis of that, what we do, we identify the first ranking function. What we do, we simply identify the first ranking. First ranking function as the dominant function. For this, we can use some cutoff points. For doing this, we use some cutoff points. Cutoff points. Okay? So this is essentially what the monofunctional approach. Like for example, we said Roorkee is a university town, education town. Okay? But if I look into Roorkee, right now Roorkee is also manufacturingly important. In Roorkee, you'll be finding that there is pharmaceutical industry. There you'll be finding automobile industry. There you'll be finding presence of precision industry. Okay? Several other works are being done in Roorkee. So, why I am simply classifying it as university town? Because university function is the dominant function of Roorkee. Okay? So this type of approach is essentially what it is, a monofunctional approach, monofunctional classification approach, or dominant functional classification approach. Now, you tell me, हमने अभी देखा था कि functional classification के दो objective हैं, academic and practical. You tell me which objective this approach is better able to fulfill. सोच के बोलो. It is better able to fulfill only academic perspective, academic objective. It is able to show that classification can be done. It is easily able to reach a classification. It is able to give the scientific texture to the discipline. But if I have to look into the utility, factor of utility, is it very utilizable? It is not. हमने दो तरह की utility की बात की. Identifying in which hierarchy. So if I am just looking into Roorkee as education city or university town, I would expect a limited flow pattern within the city. Because I am not taking that other function can also be important. Manufacturing can attract large number of people. So if I am neglecting the other important functions of the city, will I be ever able to accurately calculate the expected future flow patterns? Will I be ever able to calculate accurately its centrality? Definitely not. ठीक है ना? So this dominant function approach, utility would be limited to what? Academic purpose. From practical point of view, it is not very useful. Because it is away from reality. Majority of cities are what? They are multifunctional. हमने लिखा था, if you remember, multifunctionality is a rule. So majority of cities are what? They are multifunctional. More than one functions are important in them. Thus, it is the results of the dominant function approach is more idealized results, away from reality. Hypothetical results away from reality. That means, for practical purposes, do we need a classification which would be more closer to reality? And this type of approach is basically what? The multifunctional approach, where we assume. So multifunctional approach, what we do? Here we assume that cities are multifunctional. So here, यहाँ पर assumption दूसरा था. Here the assumption is essentially that multifunctionality is a rule. Is a rule, while monofunctionality is an exception. While monofunctionality is an exception. Monofunctionality is an exception. ठीक है? So here what we do, we identify that a city mostly perform, either it is what? Either it is multifunctional or it can also be dual function. City, it can be, there might be two functions, three functions important in the city. ठीक है? Or it can also be a specialized or monofunctional town. So variety of cities can be there. Now here it depends upon how you are calculating centrality. For Christoller, the greater the functionality, higher would be the position in hierarchy. But for Loschk, it was different. For Loschk, even a specialized town can achieve higher rank in the hierarchy by the comparative advantage it has. Okay? So again, it depends upon how you calculate centrality. Afterwards, it is the matter of perspective. But at least here we are very close to, or we are actually trying to be more closer to reality. Because in reality, what we'll be finding, majority of cities are multifunctional. More than one functions they perform. Thus, if we have all this idea, if we have all this information, can I say we would be in a position to better calculate the useful parameters like centrality? Will be able to better calculate its potential for growth pole or development of a growth foci? Okay? So multifunctional approach is what? It is more complicated. Because usme, if I say, you tell me, will the multifunctional approach involve more calculations? It would involve more calculations. Okay? It would be more complicated. It would have many categories. Like हम देखेंगे, suppose हम इंडिया के सेंसस में देखते हैं 9 categories होती हैं, occupation categories. The census of India gives. That means there would be 9 type of towns. At best we can say 10 type of towns. 10 type of towns हो सकते हैं. अगर मैं उसमें multifunctional town की एक या diversified town की भी category डाल दूं तो there would be 10 type of towns. But अगर मैं multifunctionality की बात कर रहा हूं, so you tell me, first तो एक टाइप का टाउन हो गया मोनोफंक्शनल और स्पेशलाइज्ड, तो वो कितने टाइप के हो गए? 9 होगा. You calculate one more, diversified. Now if I say there is dual functional towns, कितनी permutation combination बनेंगे? For example, one can be manufacturing retail, other can be manufacturing wholesale, other can be wholesale retail. So there can be many such type of permutation combinations. So what will happen with the number of categories in the classification? They would become large. And thus the classification would become what? It would become more complicated. Okay? So this is the basic difference between the dominant functional approach and the multiple function approach. Okay? Now, main dominant function approach that is the most famous one, it was developed by C.D. Harris. It was, you can see, Chonky D. Harris, C.D. Harris, classified US cities in 1930. 1930. What he was able to do, he was able to identify qualitatively the dominant function out of the multifunctional character of the cities. He was able to chalk out the dominant function. He used employment and occupational data reduced to percentages to indicate the cutoff points for urban activities, ranging in importance. His classification is based on the fact that some activity groups employ many more persons than others do. ठीक है, अब देखो इसको समझाता हूँ. Even before Harris, the first person to give dominant function approach classification was Orio. It was Orio who first provided the dominant function, first to propound dominant function approach. The dominant function approach. But his dominant function approach had important shortcoming. What was this shortcoming? He chose the cutoff point rigidly. without taking into account the nature of activity group involved. The nature of activity group involved. Nature of activity group involved. You tell me, can I say it is established fact that some activities like manufacturing and retail employ more number of people, while others like wholesale and transport employ lesser number of people. Can we say it is true? Okay. So can I say there should be a separate cutoff point should be identified for a separate activity? Each activity group should have a separate cutoff point. So this was incorporated by C.D. Harris in his dominant function approach. Okay? That's what happened because of this shortcoming, identifying this shortcoming. Identifying this shortcoming, C.D. Harris used separate cutoff point for separate activity group. Okay, so that is first thing about the classification of C.D. Harris. ये बात समझ में आ गई? एक दूसरा बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट है C.D. Harris के क्लासिफिकेशन का, that if we look into the Harris classification, he has used two type of cutoff points. ठीक है? He has used two types of cutoff points. Why is using two layer filter? Two layer filter कभी ऑनलाइन ट्रांसफर करना हो पैसा, सपोज यू हैव टू डू IMPS, सो वो क्या करता है, एक बार पहले अकाउंट नंबर डलवाएगा, ठीक है, जो छुप भी जाता है उसमें हैशट्रिक्स आ जाते हैं, then again it would ask you to re-enter. So what is he doing? There is a two-layer filter that you don't make a mistake. Similarly, he is also using a two-layer filter so that his classification is more accurate and he is not making mistake. So he is using two type of cutoff points. One type of cutoff point is about some absolute percentage value of activity groups, absolute percentage value of activity group. अभी देखेंगे जैसे for example in manufacturing he says that manufacturing subtype 1 में what he is saying that out of the total employment which is given in manufacturing, retail and wholesale, manufacturing alone accounts for 75% and more. So ये क्राइटेरिया क्या हो गया, ये एब्सोल्यूट क्राइटेरिया हो गया कि मैन्युफैक्चरिंग का खुद का शेयर कितना है. What is the percentage share value of manufacturing in the activity group? So that is what, this is the absolute criteria or cutoff point which he is using. But he is still not satisfied. At many places he feels he needs to recheck. That's what he does. He also develops the relative criteria or cutoff point where he compares the share percentage of the activity group in question. Activity group in question to other important activity groups. Other important activity groups. ठीक है, अभी देखते हैं, you'll understand what I'm saying, but दो तरह के criterias C.D. Harris is using. एक relative, other is more absolute cutoff point which is using. In the first one, absolute one, is using the percentage value, share value. Second one, he is comparing this, the value, with respect to some other important activity groups. ठीक है, इतनी बात समझ में आई? Now let us see, on the basis of his classification, he found that in US there were 9 activity groups he identified. Nine activity groups were identified by him. So you can see, it is manufacturing cities, subtype 1. It is subtype 1. ठीक है? And what this subtype 1 is saying, that if you combine manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling, ठीक है? So I combine manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling, and I consider this as 100. The total employment which is provided by these, I consider this as 100. Then if 74% of the total employment is given by manufacturing alone out of this 100, ठीक है, then it would be considered as manufacturing city 1. ये पहला criteria है. He again uses another one. Manufacturing and mechanical industry contain at least 45% of gainful workers. इसमें अभी उसने relative criteria use नहीं किया है. ठीक है? He is still not using the relative criteria. He is just using some absolute criteria. So this is basically the case of, नहीं इसमें sorry, relative criteria पहला वाला है, and the second criteria is essentially what it is, absolute criteria. So देख सकते हो, manufacturing and mechanical industry contain at least 45% of the total people which are employed. This is what absolute. Then उसने 3 activity group लिए, manufacturing, retail और wholesale. इसमें manufacturing accounts for how much? 74%. ठीक है? So if there is both these criteria fulfilled, then what will happen? We'll classify them as manufacturing subtype 1. Examples दिए, Detroit, New York, North California. ठीक है? इसी तरह से manufacturing cities, it is subtype 2. So यहाँ पर it is same relative and absolute. So absolute में manufacturing and mechanical industry contain between 30 to 45% of gainful workers. 30 to 45% of gainful workers. This is the absolute. Employment is more considered in terms of monetary value. Occupation is in number of workers. ठीक है, बोथ को उसने परसेंटेज में बदल दिया बस. So if you talk about gainful workers, how many people are employed? So 30 to 45% of the gainful workers are employed where? In manufacturing and mechanical industry together. Then this is the relative criteria. The second one, the first one is the relative criteria. And here he again takes into account the three, which are manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling. इन तीनों के शेयर को मिला लें तो अगेन इट इज बिकमिंग व्हाट 100. अगर उनको मान लें 100, तो आउट ऑफ देम मैन्युफैक्चरिंग शुड एटलीस्ट कंटेन हाउ मच? 60% of the employment, total employment which is given. ठीक है? So you can see he is using the relative criteria as well. So उसने दो तरह के criteria उसके absolute terms में, percentage terms, percentage absolute points के terms में, what is the share out of the total? And second is what is the share in terms of some related activity, how it is related to other activity groups. ठीक है? तो ये मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हो गया. Then there is retail centers. At least 50% of the total employment in manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling together. ये फिर से क्या है? Relative criteria. So at least 50%. That means किसका 50%? Retailing का 50% is, और कहने का मतलब है these together अगर इनको 100 मान लें, manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling. So इसमें 50% जो शेयर होगा वो किसका है? रिटेल का. ठीक है? रिटेल अकाउंट्स फॉर 50% आउट ऑफ दीज थ्री शेयर. इन तीनों के शेयर को अगर जोड़ लें तो व्हाट इट इज बिकमिंग? इट इज बिकमिंग 100. और उस 100 में से 50% इज रिटेलिंग अलोन. मिनिमम 50% इज रिटेलिंग अलोन. That means manufacturing and wholesaling would be together less than 50%. ठीक है? So ये relative हो गया. Then there is another relative criteria is using at least 2.2 times of wholesaling alone. Now he is comparing it with wholesale. So what he is saying? At least 2.2 times of wholesaling alone. Wholesaling यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड, एक होलसेल की शॉप है और एक रिटेल की शॉप है. किस में ज्यादा लोग एम्प्लॉयड होंगे? इट इज रिटेल विच वुड एम्प्लॉय मोर नंबर ऑफ पीपल बिकॉज इट हैज टू डील विथ मोर नंबर ऑफ कस्टमर्स. होलसेल कस्टमर्स वुड बी, नंबर ऑफ कस्टमर्स वुड बी लेसर. सो नंबर ऑफ पीपल एम्प्लॉयड इन होलसेलिंग, इन रिटेलिंग इज हाउ मेनी टाइम्स होलसेलिंग? 2.2 times the wholesaling. So again he gives example like Tulsa, Wichita, Shreveport are examples. So fourth वाले को अभी छोड़ के पहले fifth को देखते हैं. Wholesale centers कौन से हैं? Employment in wholesale is at least 20% of the total employment in manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling together. Wholesaling together. So कितना है? 20%. आउट ऑफ दीज थ्री. सो अगर फिर से इन तीनों को मिलाकर के 100 मान लें तो उसमें कम से कम इफ देयर इज 20% प्रेजेंट इन होलसेल, देन इट वुड बी क्लासिफाइड एज होलसेल टाउन. व्हाई ही इज गोइंग मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में के लिए उसने शेयर दिया रेंजिंग फ्रॉम 60 to 75, above 60%, देन इट वुड बी क्लासिफाइड एज मैन्युफैक्चरिंग. क्यों? Why? Because manufacturing is an activity which by its intrinsic nature employs more number of people. Retail he is giving 50%, because it is giving medium level of employment. But when it comes to wholesale, he knows that by nature wholesale is what? It is employing less number of people. Thus for when he is calculating wholesale, he is just giving 20%. Okay? At least as much as 45% in retailing alone. ठीक है, फिर उसको फिर से रिटेलिंग से कंपेयर किया, सो एटलीस्ट 45% इन रिटेलिंग अलोन. सो जितना लोग रिटेलिंग में, कम से कम उसका 45% इज इन होलसेल. ठीक है, देन सच टाइप ऑफ टाउन्स वुड बी क्लासिफाइड एज होलसेल टाउन. फॉर एग्जाम्पल ही आइडेंटिफाइज कैलिफोर्निया, डेनवर एज सम ऑफ द टाउन्स विच वर देयर. सो होलसेल सेंटर्स. अब डाइवर्सिफाइड टाउन्स. सो इन डाइवर्सिफाइड टाउन्स वो सिंपली ये कह रहा है कि इफ द क्राइटेरिया ऑफ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इज नॉट फुलफिल्ड, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग के क्राइटेरिया को फुलफिल होने के लिए कितना चाहिए? एटलीस्ट 60% और मोर. अगर हम इन तीनों को मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, रिटेलिंग एंड होलसेलिंग को 100 मान लें, तो फॉर अ सिटी टू बी क्लासिफाइड एज मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, how much manufacturing should account? 60%. For a city to be classified as retail, how much it should account? 50%. For a city to be classified as wholesale, how much it should be accounting? 20%. ठीक है, सो वही वहां पर लिखा हुआ है, लेस देन 60%, 20% एंड 50% रेस्पेक्टिवली. सो सिंपली कहने का मतलब है that a city would be classified as diverse town if the criteria 1, 2, 3 and 5 are not met. ठीक है, अभी हमने देखा 1, 2, फर्स्ट और सेकंड was what? Manufacturing. Third is retail and the fifth one is wholesale. If these criteria are not met, then again we can classify them. Also he gives another manufacturing and mechanical industry contain between 25% to 35% of the gainful workers. So Boston, Kansas, Los Angeles were the examples of diversified towns. ठीक है, बात समझ में आ गई? Others like, अब देखो ट्रांसपोर्टेशन सेंटर में, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन इट्स by its very nature, can I say it gives less employment? It is giving lesser employment. So transport and communication is at least 11% of gainful workers. Total workers में से 11% are only involved in transportation and communication. So it is absolute criteria. And workers in transport and communication equal at least 1/3 the number of manufacturing and mechanical. So second criteria is what? It is relative. Also 2/3 in trade. ठीक है, so again such type of towns are referred to as the transport centers. So New Orleans he found as an example of a transport center. ठीक है, like for example इंडिया में देखो मुगल सराय, it is what? Railway junction. And railway junction is the most important function, economic function it performs. ठीक है. Then he talked about mining towns. So here extraction of minerals account for more than 15% of the gainful workers which are present in the city. For cities of population more than 25,000. So again Minnesota, Michigan were seen as the example of such town. Then there was university towns. Enrollment in colleges is at least how much? 25% of the population of the city. Then it is classified as what? A university town. Like for example Florida, Manhattan, Utah, many of them were identified as the university towns. Okay, then there is resort and retirement towns. So resort and retirement towns, it is with low percentage of population. Here also he is giving one criteria, इसमें लिखा नहीं हुआ है. Many of them Atlantic, Miami are retirement towns. resort towns थे, retirement towns were Fort Collins, Colorado, Carter, number of them. Now, अब देखें what is the basic problem associated with this C.D. Harris classification. So, criticism of C.D. Harris classification. Shortcomings of C.D. Harris classification. So C.D. Harris classification has number of shortcomings. One important aspect is this classification is subjective. Subjective classification, as it uses arbitrary choice method in deciding the cutoff points. In deciding the cutoff points. Okay? So he is not doing any statistical calculation. Cutoff points are arrived without any statistical calculations. Without making any statistical calculations. Full stop. Thus, the choice of cutoff points will vary from person to person. Person to person. Okay? So, for example, manufacturing subtype 1, he is saying that occupation should be how much at least? 45%. Of the total gainful people employed, the manufacturing and the manufacturing and engineering, I think. Manufacturing and क्या है? Mechanical. Manufacturing and mechanical. They together account for 45%. अब मेरा मन करेगा मैं बोलूँ 50%. Why 45%? He has not explained. So he is just choosing the cutoff points from arbitrary point of view, arbitrary choice method he is using. So can I say this reduces the scientific value of the classification? So लिख लो, this reduces the scientific value of the classification. ठीक है? So that is one. Second, लिखो. There are problems with respect to using it universally. Problem with respect to using it universally. Universally. Full stop. The classification was based upon the census of United States. The census of United States, which identifies the activity groups in a particular fashion. In a particular fashion. Full stop. Different countries can have different way of identifying the activity groups or different list of activity groups. Activity groups. Full stop. This makes it difficult to use this classification across the world. Across the world. Full stop. For example, Census of Britain identifies separate activity groups. Separate activity groups. Full stop. When Harris method was used on the basis of this census, Oxford was classified as a resort town. Which in fact is a university town. Full stop. This problem arose because Oxford universities have presence of many restaurants and canteens. Which in UK are classified under hotel and restaurant activity groups. Okay? So it was found that their share was more, and thus Oxford was classified as a resort town. Okay? So where the problem arose? In US, the university canteens are not included in the hotel and restaurant. So there the census is done differently. In Britain the census is done differently. And thus what was happening? There was problems in universal applicability of this classification, because the data on which it is based, it would be fundamentally differently calculated in a different country. Okay? So this is another big problem that is there. Third problem in this classification is, it is based upon the assumption that some function or dominant function has much more value for the city than all other functions combined. Full stop. It is not necessarily true in the real world. In fact, majority of cities are multifunctional in character. Majority of cities are multifunctional in character. Full stop. Thus, it is unable to bring out true functional characteristics of the cities. Full stop. Thus, it has limited practical utility. And is useful mainly for elementary purposes, like as a teaching tool. Okay? So these are the main shortcomings in the C.D. Harris classification. So this is the dominant function approach. Then comes the multifunctional approach. Multifunction approach, you can understand, would have been adopted to essentially do what? To overcome the shortcoming of the monofunctional or the dominant function approach. So in US it was given by Howard Neilson. In UK, Moser and Scott have given this classification. Moser and Scott have given this classification. Howard Neilson classification is the one which was propounded earlier and is famous, more famous classification. So that is what we'll be talking about, Howard Neilson classification. अब you can understand, जब मैं 2015 में आया था तो this question was asked in 2015 I think, that Neilson classification को explain करना था. I was surprised कि मुझे उस साल एक स्टूडेंट यहाँ पर नहीं मिला जिसको नेल्सन के बारे में पता था कि कोई नेल्सन बंदा भी है. एक भी नहीं था, एक भी. And I was appalled by the lack of content that was there in the market. When you study functional classification, चार classification, चार ऐसे नाम हैं जो अगर आपको नहीं पता है तो you have not studied functional classification. One is definitely C.D. Harris. और यू चलो छोड़ दो, और यू दूर की बात है. Other is Howard Neilson from paper 1 point of view. From paper 2 point of view, Ashok Mitra and M.K. Jain. अगर ये आपको पता नहीं है तो you have not studied the functional classification. ठीक है? So let us see what Neilson has to talk about the functional classification. Very clearly he adopts a multiple function approach, and they are simply attempting to distinguish towns with greatest overall similarity among various cities with diversified function. For instance, grouping of town can be done like manufacturing, retailing and wholesaling town, trade, manufacturing town, trade, transport, trade, communication town, agriculture, mining, forestry town. So variety of combination, permutation combinations can be found. ठीक है? Neilson again has used the 1950 census of population US, and he identified 9 activity groups: manufacturing, retail trade, professional services, transport and communication, personal science, public administration, wholesale trading, finances, insurance and real estate, and mining. ये पर्सनल साइंस नहीं होगा, सर्विसेज होगा. ये दोनों गलत लिखा हुआ है. प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज एंड पर्सनल सर्विसेज. ठीक है? So he identified there were 9 groups. Now what he does, first he does is, for each activity group he calculates the average population of labor force engaged in that activity. So what was the average of the entire US? सबसे पहले वो क्या करता है, उसको कैलकुलेट करता है. ठीक है? Once he has calculated the average percentage of each activity group for entire US, he calculates standard deviation for each of these functional categories. ठीक है? Using a statistical formula, he calculates a standard deviation. So he has calculated 3 standard deviations for each of the category group. Plus 1 standard deviation, plus 2 standard deviation, and plus 3 standard deviation. ठीक है? Now what he does, he classifies. You see Neilson 9 activity groups which he has identified. So let us take for example manufacturing की बात करें. So what was the average share of manufacturing in employment in 1950? It was 27, around 27%, 27.07%. He calculates the standard deviation. It was found to be 16.04. Okay? Then he puts up average plus 1 SD. So it is, इन दोनों को जोड़ दिया जाएगा, 27.07 plus 16.04. So it would come out to be 43.11. Average plus 2 SD means 27, this would be 27.07 into, plus 2 into 16.04. Okay? So it would come out to be 59.15. Average plus 3 SD is 3 times standard deviation to be added in the average. Okay? So with this what he does, he calculates the standard deviation for each of the groups of activities. Now what he does, he classifies them into diversified towns, unifunctional towns, bifunctional towns and highly specialized towns. 4 categories of towns he talks about. So here is the mean for the activity groups. There is 1 SD, 2 SD and beyond that would be the 3 SD. So what he will do, suppose he takes any city, like he takes Chicago. So what he will do, for each of the 9 categories which are there in Chicago, he would plot them in this type of chart of activity groups. So if all the 9 categories are located between mean and 1 SD, that means what is taking place, there is no deviation from the average, less deviation from the average. So such type of town would be classified as what? Diversified town. Okay? It would be classified as the diversified town. If all the functions, so if 1 SD of all the functions is where the total, when the share of all the functions is within 1 SD, that is mean and 1 SD के बीच में, all the 9, then it would be classified as diversified towns. When one of the function is here between 1 SD to 2 SD, then it would be classified as unifunctional town. ठीक है, share, उसका percentage share is found where between 1 SD and 2 SD. That means it is deviating from what is the normal. ठीक है, समझ सकते हो? ये जो ग्राफ दिख रहा है, कैन आई से वो 9 ग्राफ्स बनाएगा इस तरह के. He will be drawing 9 such graphs because सबकी मीन अलग है, सबका 1 SD अलग है, 2 SD अलग है. So he will draw 9 such graphs and for each city he will put the activity groups in those 9 graphs. ठीक है, सो मैंने शिकागो के लिए किया, तो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग के लिए किया, रिटेल के लिए किया, all the 9 activity groups which are there. And if all of them would be found in mean to 1 SD, then it is diversified. If one of them show that it is between 1 SD to 2 SD, it is unifunctional. If 2 of them are showing their share within 1 SD to 2 SD, it is referred to as bifunctional. But there can be a situation where one function would be too much dominant, like manufacturing accounting for 75% of the share. So again it is what? High standard deviation. Okay? So one of the functions is beyond 2 SD, between 2 to 3 SD. So very clearly in this case what will happen? अदर फंक्शन इतने ज्यादा तो हो नहीं पाएंगे बिकॉज एक का शेयर इतना ज्यादा हो गया. So such type of towns are referred to as the highly specialized towns. ठीक है. So he makes 4 such categories of functions and he identifies or he does his functional classification. ठीक है. So that is basically the functional classification which has been adopted by Howard Neilson. अब इसमें देखें तो there are number of things which come to the fore. Mainly देखो shortcomings इसमें 2 ही तरह की हैं. One shortcoming is that he involves complex statistical calculations. So लिख लो. Shortcomings we are talking about. The multifunctional classification of Neilson is highly complicated for the following reasons. Is highly complicated for the following reasons. ये पहला shortcoming की बात कर रहे हैं. There are 2 reasons why we are saying it is complicated. One, it involves complex statistical calculations. Complex statistical calculations. दूसरा, there are too many functional groups which are formed in his classification. Which are formed in his classification. ठीक है. So you tell me, अगर हम diversified towns की बात करें तो this is here you talk about specialized 9 categories ये हो गई. 9 categories would be here. Here there would be too many categories. ठीक है. So total number of categories which become, they would be what? They would be many. So it would become what? It would become very complex type of classification. So ये एक problem है इसके classification में. Second problem, second type of problem, एक तो complexity हमने देख लिया. दूसरी प्रॉब्लम ये है कि डिस्पाइट दिस कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी, देखो डिस्पाइट दिस कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ही इज ओनली एबल टू approximately calculate the real functionality of the towns. Full stop. The actual functionality is often more complex than is recognized by Neilson. For example, there are towns where 3 functions are important. But all of them are classified in one group of diversified towns. ठीक है. So it is this type of situation. So one thing is you are making complicated. At least if you are making complicated, make it more closer to reality. Both the things are again negative becoming. One is it is complicated. Second, you find that it is just approximating reality, not very close to reality. So that is the main issue related with this classification. इसको छोड़ देना, इस पता नहीं कहाँ से आ गया, इसको काट दो. functional classification of Indian towns. So in India also, the decadal census report is essentially has been used to calculate or classify the towns according to their functionality. In India, their census classified the activities in 9 categories like cultivation, agriculture labor, mining, quarrying, fishing and forestry, household industries, manufacturing and other, then household, construction, trade and commerce, transportation, storage and communication and services. ठीक है? So number of classifications have been made. One of the earliest classification was provided by Amrit Lal using 1961 census data of 67 1 lakh cities. He adopted the dominant function approach, due to which his methodology suffered from various deficiency and thus today is not very useful, discarded. Another classification was made by Qazi Ahmad, who made other attempt to classify 1 lakh cities on the basis of 1971 census. And he used multifunctional approach. However, his approach was discarded primarily because the variables he is using did not conform to Indian setting. Okay? He is just copying the Nielsen's method and is just trying to prove it from India's point of view. So again, जैसे हमने C.D. Harris को apply करके देखा इंग्लैंड में, it was not very useful. So same thing, same problem is being seen here. So one of the most important classification has been made by Ashok Mitra. Ashok Mitra पूछा जा चुका है, so I don't think in near future it is going to be asked. Although the UPSC you can never be sure. So we need to study. Ashok Mitra applied multifunctional approach and used the census report of 1961 and 71. In the first step, his classification, he eliminated the first two activities related with agriculture and took into account only 7 activities. He further grouped these 7 occupation categories into 3 broad categories. उनको भी reclassify करके 3 broad categories में convert कर दिया. Manufacturing towns, trade and transport towns and service towns. ठीक है? In all the 7 types of occupation categories, the degree of specialization in each of the 3 basic groups were identified. That means percentage was calculated. And here the triangulation methodology was used. So कहाँ गया? ठीक है, वो तो I know. I think I saw the diagram also. Yeah. Okay. So what he is doing essentially is he is using a triangulation method. So on one side is 3 तरह की activities कौन सी है? Manufacturing, trade and transport and services. So on one side is manufacturing, on one side is trade and transport, and on one side is services. So can I say this point is the middle point? That means if you classify one city here, it would be what? 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Along these lines, what you will be finding? एक मिनट रुक जाओ. एक मिनट, इसमें थोड़ा सा एक चेंज करो. ये जो लाइंस है, दे शुड बी हियर. ठीक है. सो वन इज मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, ट्रेड एंड ट्रांसपोर्ट, and the other one is services. So again you can understand that यहाँ पर 1/3 होगा, here there is, so this point is 1/3 each. This one is 40%, then 45%, 50%. ठीक है. अब what I can do, I can take for each city the percentage of people employed in the 3 activity groups. So for each city, actual percentage of people employed in 3 activity groups are plotted on the triangle. ठीक है. So depending upon where their position lies, we can say that there would be variety of type of towns. ठीक है. So there is this point, this is the first circle, second circle and the third circle. 3 circles हैं यहाँ पर. So if we look into this, he classifies them into this 4 type of activity groups. First is predominant function highly accentuated. That means too much specialization. Predominant function highly accentuated. So in what will happen? In such a town, one of the activity group is plotted outside the third circle. ठीक है. So suppose if I find that, if I take Jamshedpur, manufacturing, I will plot, manufacturing would be located where? Outside this third circle. ठीक है. मेरे सर्कल्स थोड़े बड़े हो गए. You have to make the 50% mark कहाँ पर? जहाँ पर इन दोनों के बीच का there is there. ठीक है. So यहाँ से you calculate, यहाँ से इनफैक्ट कैलकुलेट होगा अराउंड समवेयर हियर. थोड़ा सा, इस कहने का मतलब इस सर्कल को थोड़ा सा छोटा कर लेना जस्ट. सो इफ इट इज प्लॉटेड हियर बियॉन्ड 50%, दैट मीन्स व्हाट हैपेंस? मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इज अ वेरी वेरी स्पेशलाइज्ड एक्टिविटी ऑफ द टाउन. सो दिस टाइप ऑफ टाउन्स आर क्लासिफाइड एज व्हाट? दे आर क्लासिफाइड एज प्रीडोमिनेंट फंक्शंस हाईली एक्सेंचुएटेड. ठीक है. इसका मतलब देयर कैन बी हाउ मेनी टाइप्स ऑफ सच टाउन्स? 3 टाइप्स. 3 type of such towns can be found. Then predominant functions accentuated. Here also there is specialization, but it is not so much high. So if it is plotted here, suppose, then it would be what? Predominant function accentuated. So when it is between second and third circle. Functions moderately diversified. Moderately diversified. Okay? So when functions tend to lie between 1 and 2 circle, then it would be classified as moderately diversified. When functions are highly diversified, when all the three are lying between the first circle, within the first circle. Okay? When all the three are lying within the first circle. Okay? So this is the method of Ashok Mitra. So Ashok Mitra के classification की problem क्या है? Number of problems are there. One important problem in the Ashok Mitra's classification is it is too simplified. It is multifunctional approach, but it is too simplified. And simplified in terms of what? Simplified in terms of the methodology. ठीक है? So बहुत सारे problems हैं. एक, first of all, he is reducing the activity groups into 3 major types rather than taking all the 7. Like हमने देखा नेल्सन ने 9 activity groups लिया. He is just taking only 3. So he is leading to what? Simplification, oversimplifying it. Second very important thing, he uses arbitrary choice method. Arbitrary choice method rather than basing his cutoff points on statistical calculations. Statistical calculations. So he is using what? Arbitrary choice method. Okay? So these are the 2 major shortcomings which are there. And if it is so, again, its practical utility would be what? Limited. Okay, its scientific value decreases because of the second point. Because of the first point, we'll be finding that it is less utilizable because it is away from reality. Then M.K. Jain ने some of the improve करने की कोशिश की limitations पर of Ashok Mitra's classification by eliminating the triangulation method in the classification. He used 1991 census report to classify Indian towns. That means he has done his classification very recently. Similar to Mitra, at first level he identified 3 major functional types in which he added 2 more categories. So इन्होंने थोड़ा सा improvement किया, वहाँ पर triangulation method he was choosing. So it was his problem that he had to he can categorize it into 3 types. ठीक है, 3 ही तरह के categories बन सकती थी. But he here is choosing 5 categories. So he has made the classification more broad based, which was one of the limitation of Ashok Mitra. So he has classified the activities into one group, primary activities, which include cultivation, agriculture, labor, mining, quarrying, fishing, and forestry, and household industry. All these are classified under primary activities. Census के 9 categories में से देखा था हमने. These are the categories. Industrial activity is the second one where he uses manufacturing and construction. Third is trade and commerce, transport, storage and communication and services. ठीक है? So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8 and finally 9. So there are these 9 categories. All have been categorized, grouped into 5-1. Okay? For each of the urban agglomeration, percentage of total workforce in each of the 5 categories was worked out. So how many people are employed in each of these 5 categories? Then इसने और भी सिंप्लीफाई कर दिया. ट्राइंगल वैंगल भी कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. सीधे मोनोफंक्शनल, बाईफंक्शनल एंड multifunctional towns, 3 type of towns. So monofunctional towns, in such towns, any of the 5 activities employ 40% or more of the workforce. 40% or more of the workforce. Then bifunctional towns, no one sector contributed individually to more than 40%, but two sectors together have had over 60%. So such type of towns is bifunctional town. Third is multifunctional town, where the sectors collectively could not account for even 60%. Two sectors यहाँ पर, where two sectors collectively could not account for even 60% of the total workforce involved. That means the first, and if the first and second criteria is not met, then the town would be classified as what? Multifunctional town. ठीक है? So this is the classification which is even used today by Planning Commission, erstwhile Planning Commission, and today Niti Aayog in the functional classification of the towns. Here if you talk about, same problems are there. रिगिड लिखा हुआ है यहाँ पर, रिजिड कर लेना. It is less rigid because it is not just using 3, it is using 5. ठीक है? And beautifully organizes the primary activities into one. All these can be, there can be agreement that all these involve, these are primary sector activities. ठीक है? So that is his improvement over Ashok Mitra's. It is also comparatively more simple than using the triangulation, complex triangulation method. So it is more simplified. But the problem is, इसमें भी same set of shortcomings are there. Both the shortcomings are same. One, it is also using arbitrary choice method. So मैंने बोला 50%, हैरिस ने बोला था 45%, M.K. जैन 40%. अब किसको सही माने? तीनों की बात में दम है. ठीक है? So that is basically what? Arbitrary choice method. It depends from, varies from person to person. ठीक है? So that is one thing. So it reduces the scientific value of the classification. And second is, here also, it is just grouping, taking 5 groups of activities. It could have taken more groups of activities involved. So that is basically the case of the Ashok Mitra's classification. So this is the topic of functional classification. ठीक है? ब्रेक तो नहीं चाहिए? ओके, ब्रेक ले लेते हैं 15 minutes.